Today, we are sharing an incredible customer journey that involved a large scale data center migration with 40,000 servers, major power and infrastructure constraint, and a fast track 6 week transformation with help from RackN. Joining us today is once again our favorite Rob Hirschfeld, CEO and co-founder RackN, to break down how this customer navigated complex challenges, leveraged automation, and achieved a remarkable ROI in just 6 months. This is a powerful story that we can all learn from, so you don't want to miss this story. But before we go and talk to Rob, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe this story. Now let's go and talk to Rob. Rob, it's great to have you on the show.
It's a pleasure to be here. I'm very excited about this story.
Me too, because today we are going to talk about a massive customer data center migration story. What I want to know to start this discussion today is that talk a bit about what are the cases, scenarios, circumstances when customers are looking at migrating at that scale.
Oh my goodness, there's a lot of pressure on customers for migrations, and you know, there's never just one simple choice. In the case we're going to be talking about today, it really comes back to running out of power. And that is top of mind for a lot of companies. At the end of the day, if you have a committed amount of data center infrastructure and you want to grow that infrastructure, a lot of times the top constraint that companies have, and our customer did here, is they couldn't expand without getting more power. They also were low on space, but power was really their top constraint. And so they really had to find a way to grow their infrastructure within their power profile.
Now, when it comes to power constraint, and you talked about this, customers talk about what are the challenges that they faced which led to this migration, and what are the things that they migrated.
So, as any company knows right now, there's a lot of pressure from multiple sources. And so one of the things that they were looking at was not just how do I improve my power consumption, be able to grow within the space I have. They didn't have the option to create more space to do that migration. So they're not just constrained by I need to grow. They are also constrained by how much available resources and space they have to do any changes and migration. So the ability to flex your infrastructure can often be constrained by the space that you have available to move into that new space. They also were under a lot of pressure from VMware, and even customers who were staying with VMware or having to maintain their VMware footprint are being pressured, like this customer was, to upgrade and move to the latest versions of VMware. So they had challenges from not just power and performance utilization, but also they had massive upgrades to do simultaneously in all of that infrastructure. And so, those are really serious challenges here. Now, the nice thing is that we're talking about a 40,000 server fleet. And in a 40,000 server fleet, when you talk about doing a massive migration, massive upgrade, you can really take advantage of it, performance improvements. You can really look at very important considerations if you're able to do major upgrades. Most customers that we see are doing incremental upgrades where they're deprecating things on a regular life cycle. They're bringing in new equipment as they go, and they get some performance benefits for here. For this customer, because the space constraints and the VMware challenges really intersected, they took a much more radical approach.
Now, from the customer's perspective and for RackN's perspective, can you talk about what led to such a major change in the infrastructure? What led to this migration? Can you get into the detail there?
Yeah, it's worth telling you, sort of what they were doing, right? This is a customer with 10 U.S. sites. They have multiple global sites. They had 40,000 servers in their U.S. inventory spread across those 10 sites. It's a massive amount of infrastructure, relatively small team managing that infrastructure. And the challenge here is that when you're out of space and you're looking for the type of performance improvement, what you're really doing is you're changing out the whole architecture of your underlying system. So for this customer, they choose chose to move from Intel to AMD systems to take advantage of the new power performance. Anybody familiar with VMware knows that changing the underlying processor of systems requires actually a considerable amount of change in the underlying VMware infrastructure. Clusters can't be mixed in their time frames. And, there's an element of doing this really slowly does not give them the buying power that they had. So this customer does reverse auctions. They will bid 4 vendors against each other. They'll pick the top 3. They don't just pick one. They actually keep the top 3 vendors in rotation on a 70-20-10 mix. So it's very important for them to never have a supply chain lock-in from that perspective. And if you can buy 40,000 servers at a time, the negotiating power that you have in that infrastructure is tremendous. And they actually saved money by doing this rebuild faster because they were able to increase the size of their order. So instead of doing 1,000 machines at a time, they actually got a much better deal from the vendor by doing that size of procurement. One of the side effects on all this stuff is that they also had 40,000 servers to get rid of. And so part of what we've had to help them do is have a certifiable decommissioning process so that they can get all that infrastructure out. Just moving that much infrastructure out of your data center footprint is a significant challenge. And so, every component of this required interlocking pieces. But the value of doing a massive refresh here was tremendous, from being able to negotiate, being able to reduce power quickly, being able to get performance improvements across the board, being able to upgrade their whole software platform pieces on top of that infrastructure. It's a lot of moving pieces, but you can see the more you stack those into one operation, the more effectively you get past that process and into being able to move on to the next IT project.
And as they were undergoing this migration, what are some of the biggest challenges they came across?
Some of them are pretty routine. The idea of decommissioning the gear that they had actually presented a significant amount of challenge in the process. Traditionally, when you're decommissioning gear, you don't decommission a lot of gear at a time, or you're usually adding. So decommissioning processes have generally been pretty manual and relied on, a sub vendor or a contractor to do that work. When you're talking about this amount of equipment that has to be certifiably decommissioned and then moved out from underneath the data center very quickly, you only have a couple of hours to really execute this change. We had to automate the entire decommissioning process. And the funny thing about decommissioning a system is that when you decommission it and set it back to factory, you then have to verify that you've done that work, which basically is a new discovery process. So you are, in a way, decommissioning and then onboarding. And something, if people are asking, what's so hard about decommissioning servers? When you're using proper security protocols and proper configurations for servers, that means that you've embedded your single sign-on, your auth, certificates, passwords. There's a whole bunch of information that is sensitive to a data center operator that you do not want on those systems. And the only way to scrub those systems out is to do a complete factory reset back to the original BIOS. And when you do that, it resets the passwords. Some passwords are bespoke and unique, only printed on the outside of the machine. There's all sorts of challenges to having to re-onboard machines that are now functionally blank. And that's been a big challenge, right, in helping the customer go through this process. Surprising to us, we don't usually think about the decommissioning as much of a challenge, but for this customer, we'd already done so much work on the automated onboarding that was a no-brainer. That was very easy. It was the offload that became more work for us.
And it also seems like a very expensive endeavor. What was the ROI on that?
Believe it or not, the ROI on this type of migration is under 6 months. It is so you have to remember the size of the purchase means that the discounts this bank is getting on is absolutely insane. It's just incomprehensible amount of money that they save on this, especially since they're recovering the value in the hardware that they're also giving back into the process. So between the actual cost and negotiation power they have in buying the gear. And this is something that we see across the board for our customers. When we help customers be able to be multi-vendor, the pressure they can put on vendors creates very significant discounts. And that is true across the board. Especially the more expensive the server you get, the more money you're going to be able to save on those systems. And the other thing about this is they also see power and space savings out of their data center. So they are getting a performance benefit, right? Doubling the performance of their servers. They're cutting their power utilization in half, which reduces their cost. They're potentially reducing the space they have to commit in the data center, or keeping themselves from buying new space, which is very expensive. So there are so many dimensions of this that the ROI for this type of change is really, really significant. And time is money too. So the idea that they can accomplish this in a 6-week window means that their teams aren't tied up doing a whole bunch of work. They actually plan this very quickly. So it's a 3-month project all around. And so all of the compression that they've been able to get in making this change is also contributing to the savings, right? They get this executed. Their VMware estate is now upgraded to the latest version. They've eliminated a ton of issues from that, and they're able to roll forward and free up IT infrastructure for the bank to be able to do more work, to move on to the next project. It's really significant savings all around.
What kind of risk was there? And first of all, of course, when you folks do that, you evaluate all the risks, but there are a lot of things that can go beyond your control. How did you folks kind of also handle the risk factor for this migration?
Yeah, risk is always sort of the scariest part of a lot of IT migrations and changes. And one of the nice things for us is that we've completely standardized these processes. So this isn't something that we're making up on the fly, or the bank has to sort of figure out and think about what's going on. So they've been able to build, standardize, and rehearse the onboarding processes that they use over and over again over the years. And so it is a routine practice for them to rebuild entire racks of VMware infrastructure and other data center infrastructure in just a complete routine update patch management cycle. So they already have these processes that they test, rehearse, and validate, where they onboard equipment, it comes on automatically. They reset it, it comes up automatically. So from their perspective, that part of the process really has very little risk of performance or challenge, right? They've rehearsed it well. We have worked to make those part and process standard for all of our customers. And so we've taken all the knowledge from this and turned it into completely standard operating practice. And from that perspective, the risk is really minimized. And that, the rehearsal component of this, the dev test prod of IT operational process, is a really big deal. They're not walking in and trying to figure out how to do a production migration, without having practice. They have the skills, they have the practice, they've battle tested these processes. The only thing that was risky in any of these migrations is actually the decommissioning process. And if the decommissioning process needs to take more time, then that can happen offsite, or it can be, that becomes non-time critical. So yeah, we actually minimize the risk quite a bit by doing all that work and standardization ahead of time.
And since you also mentioned time critical, can you also talk about the speed, how fast it was? Was there also any time constraint there where they did want to get it of course, everybody wants to get it as quickly as done, but talking about the time factor as well.
This is funny because this was when I learned about this project from our team. I was assuming it was a 6-month or a year-long data center migration process. And my jaw dropped when I was told it was a 6-week process. And I asked why? Why do this so fast? Why put your team through that work? And part of the challenge is that when you order that much gear, they're taking delivery of all of that infrastructure very quickly. So part of the time constraint here was this idea that they needed to move quickly, but also that they bid the gear, they paid for the gear, they received the gear, right? It ended up being a very compressed window, in part because of the supply chain and just being able to get everything working for them. But I will say, over and over again, in my experience, that when you actually have a tight, compressed time frame for doing an IT project, assuming you can mitigate the risk like we've talked about, you're actually going to really free up a lot of resources, focus on getting something done, turn it over, get it back into production. Ripping off the Band-Aid, if you can execute on it, is a really good way to get that IT infrastructure upgraded. A lot of planning goes into that. We're talking about a very compressed window for actually making the change. Significant work goes in and planning goes in to make sure it's orchestrated very carefully. So, those are two components to a successful operation like this.
And how often do you folks help customers with this kind of migration? Was it unique? Do you do something similar for other customers also?
This is a pretty unique migration in our experience so far. Most of our customers get very good at adding and building infrastructure. This idea of wanting to reset your infrastructure from a power perspective and a performance perspective is very unique. And we also think that we're going to see other customers much more eager to look at this type of infrastructure. When we talk about replacing VMware infrastructure, we look at moving in AI infrastructure, dealing with power constraints. This opens up a whole new world of opportunity, right? We have customers who have gear that is 3 to 5 years old and are running into power constraints or competing for power with other build outs. And if they can do this type of quick change out and bring in the new infrastructure and swap out their footprint and get improved performance out of it, it's a game changer in how they look at doing this type of work. That's why I love telling this story. It really is creating power capacity and space efficiency really out of nothing. This is just returned capability because you can make this type of change. Yeah, most people look at data centers here, and data center infrastructure is very long-term, slow moving. And that's because it's hard to decommission. It's hard to bring gear in. It's hard to do those resets and patches, right? We have transformed our customers' experience here. And this story is going through our own customers, and they're starting to think through, well, maybe I could be more agile. Maybe I could look at this type of reset, and then take advantage of the buying power they get from being multi-vendor. It's really a remarkable opportunity.
And as you folks work on this migration, how much work the customer had to do at their end, or you folks just came in and you took care of everything, they didn't have to worry about any pre-planning for the migration?
I'm glad you're asking that, because this is often a misconception of what RackN does and how we do it. RackN is a software company. In reality, the only thing we're providing here is software that helps our customers with standard processes and procedures to automate the whole bare metal lifecycle. So in this case, as in all cases with our customers are doing the work. They're the ones who are supervising the process. They're working with systems integrators. They're working with their data center people. They're the ones pushing the buttons and doing the work. The only thing that RackN provides in this whole process is the software that has the standardized processes baked into it. And then our customers run and execute all that. So from a RackN perspective, I don't know when those buttons are actually pushed. I don't know when things are going on. If they don't have any issues that need to get our attention and help us fix a bug or troubleshoot something, then we don't even know that the gear is being reset, changed, or applied. So this is a completely hands-off thing from a RackN perspective. And from a customer perspective, they have built the skills. They want to maintain the skills, right? It's their data center. It's their infrastructure. They're running it. We're just making it easier.
Now, can you also talk about what lesson did you learn, your team and their team also learned from this migration, which can help other customers?
One of the things that I find really fascinating for this is that we really understand how the standard processes have helped our customers accelerate. One of the things that we see is that preparing for a decommissioning process at the beginning, keeping the data, knowing what you need to do, even rehearsing that reset to factory, ensuring that you have a way to decommission the gear, I think is more valuable than we often appreciate in our own processes. So it's easy to get very tied up into how fast can I onboard? How can I get all this stuff running? It's perfectly reasonable in those rehearsals to also practice the offboarding, right? And think about how you're going to decommission those systems. And now that we've built those into standard automation, you can actually rehearse that entire arc as part of your bring up process. Think about what it takes to securely get gear completely decommissioned, shred the drives, make sure that it goes back to factory reset, and then apply, rinse, repeat those processes. It actually improves that onboarding rehearsal. Also, if you know the systems are back to factory, then when you get the gear for the first time, you can actually rehearse what it looks like over and over again to do that process. Every time we do those rehearsals and tests, every time our customer runs that drill, those actually improve the outcomes for the next piece of gear, the next expansion that our customers go through. So there's a lot of benefits here. I certainly didn't expect we would learn as much from the decommissioning process as we have.
Rob, thank you so much for joining me today and of course talk about this migration story. Thank you so much for your great insights, and as usual, I look forward to the next discussion. Thank you.
My pleasure. Love to share these customer stories, so thank you a lot.